share the screen. Or,
Okay. All right. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. My name's Bob Sewell. I'm president of the Houston Archaeological Society, and this is the July meeting of our society. This evening, I'm pleased to announce our speaker for this evening is Mr. Gary Pinkerton. Gary's a good friend of HAS. He's spoken to us before, and he's going to talk to us about one of his new books. Since he first learned that a rut across his family land was the route of an historic road into early Texas, Gary's passion for research and writing about the history of East Texas has resulted in the publication of 4 works of history. Trammell's Trace, the first road to Texas from the north, was published in 2016. Presented a history of the 200-year-old byway and its role in early smuggling and migration into Texas, beginning in the 1880s. His second book, True Believers, Treasure Hunters at Hendricks Lake, published in 2017, tells the story of men who believed in a Texas treasure legend enough to search for it. Don't we all want to do that? Paper Driver, how the world's greatest treasure hunter never got wet, profiles Harry Reisberg, who made a living out of being a skilled liar. I'd like to read that one, actually. Writing about underwater exploits that never happened. Gary's latest work, as I said, called Bridles and Biscuits, The Contraband Culture of Spanish East Texas, focuses on a period between 1770 and 1813 that has been called the last Spanish episode of the Texas drama. Gary holds a Master of Social Work degree from the University of Houston and a bachelor's degree in social work and psychology from East Texas A&M, and spent his career working in human resources. As an independent researcher, he contributes to diverse projects and is also a web designer focusing on non-profit organizations. He's a fellow of the East Texas Historical Association and currently serves as the executive director of the Alliance for Texas History, a new historical organization. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gary Pinkerton.
Rob?
Off you go.
All right.
Forward.
I've got to really shorten that introduction up. It's good to be here in Trinity Minute Hall again with HAS. I also worked as an election clerk during the 2016 election, which was quite interesting. And this hand right here got a fist bump from Common right outside on his way to the restroom. So fist bump to you back from Common. Okay. It's good to see Ted Campbell there. Ted apparently is one of about 4 siblings, because Ted is everywhere. I see you everywhere, Ted. I want to be you when I grow up. So as Bob said, here to talk about this book about contraband culture in Spanish East Texas, and I'll wait a little bit to explain my thesis about that. But I want to tell you the story about Jose Trejo. He was a private in the Spanish militia that was sent to Nacogdoches from La Bahia, from Goliad. He was being investigated along with others for their involvement in contraband, which is the reason they were sent to Nacogdoches, was to prevent that same trade that they were engaged in. So he's talking to a high-level Spanish official. I'm sure he's quite nervous. He took an oath, made the sign of the cross, and promised to tell the truth about his involvement in the contraband trade. He was there with his captain, Juan Cortez, from La Bahia to do what was turned out to be a sham investigation of smuggling carried on by Antonio Gilly Barvo, who for 20 years had ruled that area without much interference. When you think about contraband during that period, you think about tobacco, firearms, and oddly, playing cards were a monopoly for the Spanish crown. And so any smuggling, any trade in unauthorized trade and untaxed trade in playing cards was also part of the problem and a way to prevent gambling, which led to all kinds of other problems. As human nature tends, not much has changed in what are the critical contraband items. We've all read stories about 18-wheelers full of contraband cigarettes coming up Highway 59, and arms are everywhere. So the common currency of the time for trade with the indigenous people around Nacogdoches was deer skins. There were thousands of them traded. I know in one source I found in 1820-ish, there were 35,000 deer skins that came out of Nacogdoches. That's a lot of deer and a lot of currency. So when they acquired these deer skins, Private Trejo was able to acquire some deer skins that became his currency in trade from Natchitoches. The items that were confiscated from the private during that his shopping trip that were considered contraband included female clothing, which could only be used to impress someone back in La Bahia. When Trejo was asked by the Spanish Inquisitor what he traded to receive those deer skins, he said that he traded the bridle of his horse and his breakfast. So now you know where the title of the book comes from. And that really sets the tone for what I learned about the contraband trade, that it's really quite domestic. One of the early Spanish trips into East Texas found 24 pairs of blue French stockings in a Caddo village. This is 1718 in August. And so my 14-year-old part of my brain, which is still very well fed, wants to think, what's somebody doing wearing blue hosiery in the middle of East Texas in August, you know? But it was the way it looked, the way it felt. It was those personal items that made up the essence of the trade. A list of contraband goods that were confiscated in 1774 found some pretty mundane items: axes, scissors, hinges, salt shakers. You can tell from the relative value of the items what was more valued than others. 6 pairs of scissors, 2 pesos for the lot, not so great. 12 table knives with deer handles, 3 pesos, not so great. But if you've got some mules, there are 10 pesos each. Secondhand blunderbusquets and battered muskets were, whether those adjectives were added to make clear that they weren't a danger to the Spanish or not, remains to be seen. Those tin metal door plates were clearly not headed for Nacogdoches, since most of the properties there had no walls or doors. So Antonio Gilly Barvo is just a really interesting guy, and growing up East Texas and doing a lot of research in East Texas, you just kind of accept the fact that Barvo is who he was. He was in charge of Nacogdoches. He was a trader. He was a Frenchman a Spaniard who came through Los Adayas. His father was a soldier there. His involvement in the Spanish government began in Los Adayas. When they were kicked out in 1773, it was Ibarbo who ended up leading them over to Bayar and then immediately asking for permission to relocate back. He, from 1773 until 1791, when he was removed from that post by about the fifth or sixth Spanish governor he'd served under. He was dominant in that role in controlling and engaging in contraband. After he was removed from his post, there were 18 different military commanders that served Nacogdoches between 1791 and 1812. Each one of them engaged in contraband immediately on arriving. So the Spanish governor, after the Adeseños returned to Nacogdoches in 1780, gave Ibarbo this title. I like reading it, so it pleased me. Delegate Judge of Confiscation and Contraband in the district, territory, and jurisdiction of the town of Nuestra Senora de Pilar de Nacogdoches and the area from there down to the northern seacoast. So you got that over there was the message, but clearly there were no business cards printed with that title on it. The borderlands along the Sabine River at that time, I call them a cultural ecotone. An ecotone is where two landscapes come together and begin to change each other by virtue of that. A good example of an ecotone is the roadside of any highway in East Texas, where things grow thicker along that edge and then open up back into the woods. That cultural ecotone between French and Spanish and indigenous people created an interesting environment where there was so much intermingling and intermarrying even that ecotone led to a lot of culture change around those borderlands. Natchitoches was kind of the center of the universe during that time. French trade that came up from New Orleans to Natchitoches found its way into East Texas across the border, initially through Los Adias. This is continually called, there's a book title, Francis Galland, The First Capital of Texas. We hear it referred to that often, on the Texas side at least. On the Louisiana side, they don't quite know what to do with it. So I suggested to the historic site manager there that perhaps Texas should just go ahead and re-annex that site and take it over. And he was like overjoyed to hear that. So Los Adias was, just a few miles west of Natchitoches, intermarrying trade, all kinds of interaction between French and Spanish that was viewed by distant rulers in Spain as a terrible, horrible thing, and wanted those Spanish people, Spanish settlers in Los Adias, to trade with San Antonio, with Bayard, with goods that came up through Saltillo. So if there's a Dollar General store down the street, you're not going to go to the next town to go shopping, right? So it was always a cozy arrangement. The Adeseños were evicted in 1773, and all the Spanish settlements in East Texas were closed. That everything to the north and east of that blue line was devoid of any Spanish settlement after that edict. And they pretty much abandoned a territory they held little claim on in the first place. Some of those sites that had been there, you can see Los Adias and Natchitoches on the right there. Nacogdoches, the Star, is a settlement I'm going to tell you a little bit more about, and La Bahia and Goliad down to the south. So how many of you have heard of the settlement of Bucareli? That's the normal answer. And so you don't have to feel bad about it, but it is a missing piece of history that I work hard to tell the story of in this book. Bucareli was a Spanish settlement that formed on the Trinity River in 1773 by the Adeseños, who were finally granted permission to return part of the way back to their home in Los Adias. And they settled at the Bedias Creek and the Trinity River, where three counties come together now. So here's another quiz question. You'll do about the same on this. What do these two people have in common? I've decided they look alike. Do you see the nose and the face? I'm just, maybe there's something going on there. So the man on the left, His Excellency Antonio Maria de Bucareli Ursua, is who the settlement was named for. He was the viceroy of New Spain at the time that Ibarbo and the Adeseños were granted permission to return part way to their home and settle at the Trinity. So they made a good PR move and named it after the viceroy who kind of paved the way for them to do that. Miss Trudy lived at the spot near where Bucareli was located. She lived at the confluence of Bedice Creek and the Trinity River and had more than once watched her property float off into the Trinity during some flooding, particularly prior to the Lake Livingston. She told me at the time that she knew that was where she wanted to live her life, no matter what happened there, and she wanted her ashes to be spread right down there in that river. She was arrested along with a number of others in the 60s for poaching white bass illegally up Bedice Creek. And she was acquitted when the judge took sympathy after she blessed him cursed him out, for for allowing those fish to go to waste and not feeding poor people with those white bass. Quite a character. So this Bucareli was 140 uninhabited leagues distant from Bayard, and for the greater part surrounded with dangers. There was literally nothing else except indigenous villages, Caddo to the north, Bedi, Karankawa, Takapan to the south. So about 350 miles from Bayard, and the dangers included not only the people of the area, but the terrain and the floods. That floodplain along the Trinity at that location is about 5 miles wide. It's a perfect place to keep mustangs, to keep horses. A friend of Ibarbo's, a Frenchman named Nicholas Lamoth, kept about 500 horses there at one time, and later names for that area were called Mustang Prairie. The terrain was really ideal. When the Adeseños moved to the Trinity, again, the summertime, bad time, there was nothing there. So they built everything from scratch. It's not unexpected that because they had these structures in Los Adayas that they built jacales and concentrated themselves at first, but then spread up and down as more farming and took place and ranching. Some of the Adeseños, when they were in Bayard, had lived in goatskin tents, so there may have been some of those structures as well. What they weren't familiar with was the flooding that took place along the Trinity periodically. During that first year, their crops they had planted were completely wiped out, and the Bedi Indians nearby, who showed them who treated them quite hospitably, showed them better locations out of the floodplain. There are these deep cuts that the Trinity's made, so these bluffs led to the fact that key crossings existed where the access was not so steep, and there was a natural, like a real soft limestone base underneath that that led to a lot of shoals up and down the Trinity. Tom Gann from Lufkin came to me with some road-connected questions, and we ended up collaborating on this book. And this is Tom standing just outside of Miss Trudy's home there, Bedi Creek to the right and Trinity to the left. So Bucareli said it was founded on the right bank of the Trinity. There were shoals up and down this area. You can see the county line between Houston and Walker County taking place there, with Madison County and on the south side. So that point of contact was where Bedi Creek entered the Trinity. You can also see the Eastham State Prison Farm. If you've ever driven by that, it's a real hilly place. And if any of you were going to get thrown in the clinker to do archaeology, I would suggest Eastham be your choice. Everybody's looking at Frank. I don't know why. This is a 1960 aerial of that same area. This is before the impoundment of Lake Livingston. So you can see shoals above and below the mouth of Bedias Creek there. And that likely location of Bucareli is one based on the research that I did and having visited that spot a couple of times is a place where the likely earliest settlements were or farther up to the west of there. I'll show you that site in a minute. There has been archaeological work done in that area. Apparently, at one time, there was a notion that they would do lignite mining. Thankfully, none of that took place. But there are Walker County sites that cover that area. That one I've marked in yellow is one that if you have access on the atlas, you can look up and see. The McCann family owns all that bottomland, all the place, all the way down to the confluence and down to the Trinity. Hundreds of acres. The woman who owned it, her father had run Lost Indian Camp during the 50s. This is where young boys would go to summer camp for a month. And while they were there, they would ride horses naked in the Trinity and get their hair cut in a mohawk. I'm pretty sure you could get arrested for that right now. That's the kind of camp it was. When they were excavating in a building addition for Lost Indian Camp, they dug into a burial, and that burial exists still in the land below that house, and is covered by plexiglass with a lighting behind it, so you can see the entire body stretched out there. And that archaeological notes connected to that survey point that out. But there were likely mounds around there, and not much is known. They didn't allow any digging in the mounds. The location of these Bedi villages were well marked on multiple maps. That's a 1742 at the top and an 1822 at the bottom. If you're ever Google search for Bedi, you have to have about 12 different variations of that very short word because it was spelled so many different ways. The Bedi kind of were an interesting tribe, smallish. They occupied this middle ground, not just geographically, but in a lot of ways in the nature of the trade. They traded arms with the Apache, but they kind of ran, behind the main groups. They were part of the Takapa language group, but were cozy with the Caddo as well to the north. So the positive comments made about the time by Governor Cabello was that the location was useful and valuable by virtue of being contiguous with regions inhabited by Indians of the friendly nations. Also from there, Captain Ibarvo was able to observe the conduct of their traders, which is a matter of considerable importance. It was a sell job. That letter was written to Commandant General Croy, who was vehemently opposed not just to contraband, but to Ibarvo himself, and tried multiple times to get them removed. This letter, the negative from Hugo Oconor, the place they had chosen the place which better than any other enables them to engage in illicit trade. The citizens established on the Trinity have better facilities than formerly at Los Adias for contraband trade, which he tried to close. The priests were kind of ambivalent at times, but from the perspective of the priest, people were attracted to the distant settlement because they could carry on their lives with, quote, a liberty of conscience. There were two things that Ibarvo tried to get from the governor when they founded Bucareli, and for multiple years. One was ammunition and the other was a priest. And they had trouble getting either of those over time. That flag there is Nacogdoches, and there's a trail off that image back to the east to Natchitoches. But I talk about Nacogdoches as having the first loop in Texas. There were more roads around Nacogdoches than there were that one through it. You can see this map mark the route of the contrabandiers to the south, heading toward Bucareli and on to La Bahia and Goliad. La Bahia was a major center for contraband trade outside of the direct view of the Spanish government. You can see the road to the north that went to the Canto village, and the main dotted one there, which is basically the El Camino Real, heading toward the Trinity as well. This map was one of the incredible finds in doing this research. This little map is 12 inches by 13 inches. It's in the DRT collections in Austin. It was a UTSA at the time. So 12 by 13, drawn by Stephen F. Austin, but they scanned this thing in such ridiculous resolution that you can see creek names, settlements, Indian villages. It is an incredibly detailed view of East Texas. Some of you may know, oh crap, I'm forgetting his name, an archaeologist, Stewart, up in Northeast Texas. Bob, what's his name? Anybody know? Never mind. He had called these trails, the way they were written, the yard of thar roads. They kind of went from here to there, and we didn't worry about a whole lot of stuff. There were multiple falls or shoals up and down the Trinity at different times, and Austin in 1820s labeled this road at that falls the old road upriver from Bedias Creek. That's not the one I settled on as the likely spot for Bucareli and Paso Tomas, which was named in the settlement. So Jerry McCann, who I mentioned earlier, her father owned Lost Indian Camp. This is she and a few other bathing beauties at that shoal south of Bedi Creek that I believe was the likely Paso Tomas, given all the data and research. So this map, you can download it at my website. I'll show you that at the end. Shows these trade routes of the earlier period of the Spanish contraband trade and the likely routes that they took. So I want to talk a minute about the economics of contraband trade. This was the thesis of the book that I mentioned to you earlier. So in 1777, this is 3 years after Bucareli was founded, there were 347 people living on the banks of the Trinity River. That's a lot of people by East Texas standards. 125 men, 89 women, 2 male and 3 female enslaved, and equal numbers of boys and girls. So these are similar populations to places I'm familiar with in East Texas. Mount Enterprise is where my family all grew up, where we have that family farm. Bedias, there is a town named that, spelled differently again, nearby. Midway is probably the closest town to where Bucareli is now. And of course, my favorite city in Texas, Gary City. All those populations were right at where Bucareli was. One red light towns. But what they have in common is they all have a Dollar General. And I believe the Dollar General is the exact same business model that Gilly Barvo and Los Adias and La Bahia operated under. We don't want to go to Bayard or Mexico City for our goods. They're right down the street. So Dollar General's business model is you offer goods people want, you make it easy to purchase, and it brings good closer to people and out of the way places. We have a lake property on Lake Merval up near Carthage, and the one blinking red light of Clayton has a Dollar General. And if we go down the road to Gary City, 10 miles in the other direction, there's another Dollar General. We have 2 in the neighborhood. They're everywhere. But the same business model applies. They all work. So Bucareli was abandoned after a series of very unfortunate events. They had always lived in fear, being out in the literal middle of nowhere with no reinforcements, little arms, They had a militia, but they didn't have enough rifles to equip everyone. So they were very vulnerable and very dependent on the support and help of the friendly nations that were surrounding them. But it was the Comanche that they feared the most. So on one day, on a nearby hill, perhaps that hill where Lost Indian Camp is located, the population of Bucareli began to panic. The Comanche had ridden to the top of the hill and gotten off their horses to take a rest. There really weren't any threatening gestures or movements. They were just there watching and paying attention. They later told Antonio de Mézières that they were merely resting and hoping to make contact with him and with others. The people of Bucareli believed, of course, that they were about to be raided and killed. So they left the stockade. They chased the Comanches. The Comanches stole hundreds of the horses that Lamath had. There was a conflict not once, but multiple times. After that happened, the entire population of Bucareli appeared at Antonio Guilibarvo's door and said, "We got to get out of here." He let them know that he couldn't grant them permission, but he would certainly let the governor know where they were headed. And where they were headed was to the former mission of Nacogdoches, which even though East Texas was abandoned, there were stragglers, but the structures there had been left to rot. The gardens had grown up, and it was not used largely at all. So about half the people started moving. They had to leave goods behind. The priest left first with the sick and injured and others, women and children. A few men stayed behind to what they said was to protect the goods. They hid a lot of things, and they were going to bring the rest of the furniture, if you will. And that's when there was a fire. So you have to wonder if it was the fire like the one that took San Felipe down, if it was set intentionally to prevent others from using it. That's kind of my guess. But they said that much of the property burned. There was a wooden stockade. The jail and the chapel were conveniently next to each other. Heaven and hell, I guess. But the buildings burned. And then shortly after, during the night, the Trinity River flooded. So they describe floating out on the remains of these wooden buildings. The easiest escape for most of them was to the west, to the side opposite Nacogdoches, opposite on the Trinity River. That floodplain was 5 miles wide. A musket shot, they said, could not get across. So they had to wait about 3 weeks for the water to go down suitable for them to cross. The Comanche threatened them again, surrounded them, but didn't take their horses or create any violence. The water in there runs quickly. This is a little mini poem that Jerry McCann's mother wrote. It comes up so quickly, this overflow, but gradually recedes, the grass will grow. I was fortunate to get these two different pictures during visits there, and the yellow line and the star mark the same trees in each picture. That bottomland was completely inundated. So we know that and this is after the lake, after Lake Livingston. So we can only guess where the floodplain was from the topography during that time. So the Adeseños, the people from Los Adayes, the people who settled Bucareli, were what I call the first families of Nacogdoches. They were the ones that led to Nacogdoches in 1779, becoming a permanently occupied city. If you ever go up that way, there's all kinds of new bridges for Interstate 69 being built. And in the one in stone overpass, as you come in from the south, it has 1779 engraved in stone now. So I guess they'll settle on that being the year. Nacogdoches, as I said, was decrepit and in need of repair. They found life difficult again, but they were closer to their true home in Los Adayes, and there was certainly travel back and forth for more than just trade. So when Tom and I were doing our research, we were riding the back roads and locating some of these places, and we knew that there was this artifact called the Bucareli rifle. It was a metal gun stock that was dug up on the Eastham prison farm and brought to the library in Trinity, Texas, which is not far from where Bucareli is located. They painted it up. They stuck a piece of flint in it. They put it in this really nice case. They had a short description about it. And so when Tom and I visited, it was around Thanksgiving, and we walked in the library, and this is where we found the Bucareli rifle. So I looked at the rifle, and I looked at the two ladies standing there, and I looked at the rifle. I said, "Can we take Frosty the Snowman off of that right now?" Because we'd like to see that rifle. So they said, sure. We pulled it out. We took all that decoration off. And the ladies, as we told the story, were fascinated. This is Trinity, which is 20 minutes from Trudy, Miss Trudy's house on the Trinity. And one of the ladies said, "I just love Texas history." And it was all I could do to refrain my giggle until I got outside. And I told Tom, this is exactly the people that we're writing for. People who love Texas history, but don't really have a clue about what truly happened on the ground that they're walking around on. And that's just all too common. It's just a fact of life. And so for me, history has always been about perspective. If you're watching a baseball game or looking at a landscape through a hole in the fence, you're only going to see what you want to see. So if your historical perspective is only a particular era or a particular geography or a particular race, you're going to miss things. You're going to miss stuff, the context, what was happening around at that time, the broader picture. Thank God for Google Notes to get me to here from Kingwood. It's always a different route, it seems, but continually plugged up by what I call now the gates of hell at 45 and 610. But most of us grew up with paper maps, and I try to convince my kids that if you're going to go from point A to point B, Google Maps is definitely the way to go. But I'm the kind of person that when it gets to that, an alternate route has been found, 10 minutes slower, I'm yanking the wheel. I want to go see that. And that was the cool thing about paper maps. You could not only see where you're going, but you could see what else is out there. What else is going on? And so, as the director of the Alliance for Texas History, which is a historical organization, I encourage you to take a look at. The website is atxh.org, Alliance for Texas History. Then our perspective is providing a full picture about all the peoples of Texas, not some Disneyland view or a revolution-centric heroes approach to what history is about. Some people have talked about, Texas and history in general being this grand tapestry that's been woven over time. But my view of it is that it's just a rag rug of scraps stitched together through people's perseverance and pride. Every piece of that rug, every bit of that scrap of history contributed to that being a functional Texas these days. And so our own family history is made up of that. And if you have generations to look back on that help you remember that, then it's a wonderful thing. So Nacogdoches, is kind of the historic center of East Texas and certainly worthy of our attention. A lot of work had been done there. Tom Brittlebrook, made it his home and did a lot of work down there. But the turn of the last century was hard on Spanish history in Nacogdoches. Pretty much all at the same time, the excavation was begun on a courthouse site, and they began digging up bones and jewelry, likely the place of the Spanish cemetery at the corner of Main and North Street. The Plaza Principal, the center of Nacogdoches, the heart of that Spanish village, was dug up with no archaeological involvement at all. In fact, the story is that they were told if they found something to not tell anybody about it. But Plaza Principal was dug up and a post office was built, which is now the visitor center. in that time period, early 1900s, the stone fort was described as the most decrepit building in a most decrepit town. And so it was probably needed to be torn down, but my goodness, that's hard to say. Bricks and stones from there were taken and preserved and became part of 2 or 3 other stone houses now called the Stone Fort, which was Ibarvo's trading post and home. So that was progress. The way we keep up with that now is a very nice museum and a replica of that stone house, a plaque where Spanish graves once lay, and this historical marker in the front yard of a family who still has the little remains of a mound in their front yard. So when you look back at this period of history, where Spanish missions or San Antonio had their missions, East Texas is left only with markers. So it's something for us to pay attention to and to work with. So I thank you for your attention and the invitation to come back. If you are interested, thank you. If you are interested in learning more about any of the books or the stories behind them, there's the website. And if you place an order, use free ship, and I'll ship it to you for nothing. All right.
Okay, we've got some time for questions. So if anybody's got a question for Gary, then let's fire away.
Bob, did you ever talk to Gary about the search we were doing? I can't even remember the name of the ranch. The one over in Waller County where we were looking at the headwaters of Cypress Creek for the Ecoquisa Village, Antonio El Gordo and all that.
Oh, the Santa Rosa.
Oh, Gorda? Santa Rosa?
No, we never managed
No,
to
we haven't.
touch base on that.
I don't recall the Spanish lieutenant who took the.
Come up, hey Frank, come up here because they can't hear you on the Zoom.
I'm just asking a question.
I'll repeat his question.
HAS was invited by Dan Worrell, and who was the other gentleman, historian. They looked back at the old records, and when they left the mission on the Trinity, they were supposedly following up what they thought was now Spring Creek, which I think, Roger, did you guys do some sort of excavation at the headwaters of Spring Creek?
Well, we pretty far upstream on Spring Creek.
Jesse James Park, that one?
Jesse Jones.
Jesse Jones.
I
I was thinking with HAS because Tom Knuckles was involved with that back in the day or something like that. But anyway, they did a survey back 1760-ish. And all the records for all the years said that they thought that they were at the headwaters of Spring Creek. But Dan Worrell and Jim Smith, what was his name? I can't remember. I apologize. They researched it. And the Spanish records said that the headwaters, it looked like a sideways question mark, which if you look at a map of the headwaters of Spring Creek, which is right in Waller County, right at the Harris-Waller border, sure enough, it's like a question mark. So we got permission to go on this ranch 2 years ago. Unfortunately, they've done a lot of bulldozer work. They're putting in water reservoirs and stuff like that, pipelines going in. We didn't know how deep we were going to have to go. We tried metal detecting. All we were doing is finding shotgun shells, modern stuff. We did do a lot of shovel testing, and then it got to the heat of summer, and we kind of figured we were wasting our time out there. So could go back in the future, but we were looking for the Ecoquisa village that purportedly was there, and it was under a chief, I believe it was Antonio El Gordo, Fat Tony. Yeah. So anyway, they were going to put a mission in over there, and they had a place for the Presidio, which was, what's that mound over there? It's a natural mound that they were going to put a Presidio on in about a mile away, Hockley Mound or something like that, which could have changed Texas history in some ways. If they had put a mission right over there, and made it work because they were going to do a lot of farming and all that. It had a good drainage area and all that. Then it actually could have turned into, who knows, maybe
Yeah.
like a mission like San Antonio. But they pulled the plug on it when the next leader of Texas for the Spanish said, no, we're not going to invest in that. So I'm sorry I took up so much time here.
This whole Middle Trinity area has really been lightly investigated by comparison to the north, the Caddo, and to the south as well.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
So why were such basic items considered contraband? Why not open up free trade?
Wow. Yeah, the question was, why was this stuff contraband? Why was it considered, why wasn't it just free trade? The Spanish had two bureaucracies that were unmovable, and that was the Spanish government and the Catholic Church. And so both of them really liked making rules. Ostensibly, it seemed to be about taxes, about paying duties, but there was nobody there to collect it. So it was just kind of running in circles with your hair on fire a lot of times when everybody knew what was going on. On one of those roads around Nacogdoches, a priest was arrested with contraband. And the dialogue in that story firsthand, basically, the Spanish captain and a couple soldiers rode up and basically said, "Hey, what you got?" And the priest said, "Sit down and have lunch with us, my boy." "Oh, it's okay. Those aren't, contraband carriers. Those are just helpers for the church." The church was big on smuggling French tobacco to provide as gifts to the indigenous people that they wanted to attract into the mission. So everybody had their reasons. Reselling it to others farther away was part of it, but it was just an exercise in futility. It was really, you got to the point it was kind of comical because you really never read anything where it made a real difference in what they were doing. The French were out slugging them terrifically on the relationships with their cohort, with their indigenous. In the book, I tell a story about Antonio Gilly Barvo bringing French soldiers from Natchitoches to meet with the Kichi chief in East Texas, and he basically Ibarvo told the chief, "Well, I'm control this land. Why are you trading with this other guy?" And the chief picked up a handful of dirt and said, "Here, it's yours. Take it with you." And Ibarvo's famous temper flared up, but then he tucked his tail and went back to Natchitoches and Nacogdoches on his own. So it was just a comical exercise, much ado about nothing in a lot of cases.
Any more questions?
I've got one online. Here we go. Was the mound in Nacogdoches on Mound Street of Caddo origin?
Yes, and there were across the street on the campus of the original State College, Stephen F. Austin State College, there were much larger mounds there that have been fully excavated and understood. But yeah, Mound Street is named for those mounds. But they're pretty much gone. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Good. Thank you very much, Gary.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Hope everyone enjoyed that. As there are no more questions, I'll sign off and wish you a very pleasant evening.